The ceiling fan hums its familiar rhythm above us, the same software that has soundtracked a dozen nights like this over the years. Owen and I lie in our separate beds in the guest room, twin mattresses pushed against opposite walls like we're still teenagers at a sleepover. The ritual feels both childish and impossibly heavy now, weighted with everything we've never said. The party downstairs has finally quieted. Voices that echoed through the floorboards an hour ago have dissolved into the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Everyone else has gone home to their own beds, their own lives, leaving us here in this borrowed space that somehow feels more honest than anywhere else we've ever been together. I listen to Owen's breathing in the darkness, trying to match my own rhythm to his without seeming deliberate about it. The sheets rustle as he shifts, and I wonder if he's as awake as I am. If he's also staring at the ceiling and thinking about how strange this is, two men pushing 40, lying here like we're still figuring out who we're supposed to become. He speaks first, his voice barely above a whisper. He tells me he's been thinking about Sarah again, his ex from college, how she used to curl up against him during movies. The words float between us in the dark, and I force myself to listen without flinching, even though hearing him talk about holding someone else always feels like swallowing glass. Then he laughs, soft and dismissive. He says he doesn't really miss it, the cuddling, the way people cling to each other like they're afraid of floating away. He calls it trivial, this need for physical closeness, like it's something he's outgrown. His voice carries that casual certainty I've always envied, the way he can dismiss entire categories of human longing with a shrug. The words settle into my chest like stones. I want to argue with him, to tell him that touch isn't trivial, that some of us spend years learning to live without it and never quite succeed. Instead, I murmur something non-committal, letting the silence expand between us like a held breath. Minutes pass, maybe 10, maybe 20. Time moves differently in the dark, especially here, where every small sound feels amplified and every moment of quiet seems to last forever. I'm almost convinced he's fallen asleep when I feel the bed shift beside me. Owen moves without announcing it, his body crossing the invisible divide between our separate spaces. His leg drapes over mine, casual and warm, as if the conversation about not needing closeness had never happened. The weight of him settles against me like a contradiction made flesh, and I freeze, afraid that moving might break whatever spell has allowed this to happen. His skin is warm through the thin fabric of his sleep shorts, and I can feel the steady rhythm of his pulse where his ankle rests against my calf. The touch is simple, almost innocent, yet it carries the weight of everything we've never allowed ourselves to acknowledge. It's a betrayal of his own words, spoken just minutes ago, and somehow that makes it more precious than any deliberate gesture could be. I lie perfectly still, afraid to breathe too deeply, afraid to shift even slightly in case it reminds him where his body has wandered in the darkness. The moment stretches between us, fragile and electric, charged with the kind of possibility that can only exist in the space between sleeping and waking, between friendship and something else entirely. The ceiling fan continues its steady rotation above us, counting down seconds that feel both eternal and fleeting. I close my eyes and try to memorize the weight of his leg against mine, the way his breathing has deepened into something approaching sleep, the impossible tenderness of this accidental intimacy. Tomorrow, we'll wake up and pretend this never happened. We'll make coffee and talk about work and carefully avoid meeting each other's eyes for too long. But tonight, in this borrowed room with its borrowed beds, Owen's body has told me a truth his words spent all evening denying. And I lie here in the darkness, holding that truth like a secret I'm not allowed to keep. Morning arrives like a gentle betrayal. I wake to find Owen already gone from the bed beside me, the space where his warmth had been now cool and empty. The sound of running water drifts from the bathroom down the hall, and I lie still for a moment, staring at the impression his body left in the sheets, wondering if I dreamed the weight of his leg against mine. This is my life now at 38. I live in a modest apartment on the third floor of a converted Victorian in a town small enough that I recognize most faces at the grocery store, but large enough that I can disappear when I need to. The building sits on a tree-lined street where neighbors nod politely but rarely stop to talk, where porch lights flicker on at dusk like scattered stars, illuminating lives I'll never really know. My apartment tells the story of a man who has learned to live carefully. Books line the walls in neat rows, stacked like sentinels guarding secrets I've never learned to speak aloud. Philosophy and poetry, novels about quiet lives and unrequited longings, biographies of men who loved in shadows. The coffee maker sits precisely where it belongs on the kitchen counter, next to a single mug that has never had a partner. In the bedroom, my clothes hang in ordered rows, each shirt pressed and waiting, each day planned down to its careful details. I work in publishing, a job that pays well enough and asks little of me beyond attention to detail and the ability to disappear into other people's stories. My office sits in a converted warehouse downtown, where I spend my days editing manuscripts about lives more dramatic than my own. Romance novels, mostly, filled with passion and declarations and happy endings that feel like fiction even when they're supposed to be real. The work suits me because it requires no performance, no pretense of being someone I'm not. I arrive at 8, leave at 5, and speak to my colleagues just enough to seem friendly without inviting deeper connection. They know I'm single, that I keep to myself, that I'm reliable in the way that quiet people often are. They don't know about the photographs hidden in my desk drawer, pictures of Owen and me from college, camping trips where we shared tents and sleeping bags and never questioned the easy intimacy of it all. Owen's life unfolded differently. He married young, right after graduation, to a woman named Claire who laughed easily and fit into his world without effort. They have 2 children now, a boy and a girl who look like smaller versions of their father, with his easy smile and confident way of moving through the world. He lives 3 hours north in a suburb where the houses have proper yards and 2-car garages, where neighbors organize block parties and know each other's children by name. He visits less often now than he used to. Work and family obligations, he says, and I believe him because the alternative is too painful to consider. But when he does come, we slip back into the rhythm we've maintained for 20 years, ever since we were roommates sharing a cramped dorm room and staying up until dawn talking about everything except the one thing that mattered most. I remember those nights with the clarity that comes from revisiting memories too often. Owen sprawled across his narrow bed, gesturing wildly as he talked about his philosophy classes, his theories about art and meaning, and what it meant to live an authentic life. I would lie on my own bed, just 3 feet away, listening to his voice and trying not to notice how the moonlight caught the line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth when he smiled. We took weekend trips then, driving Owen's beat-up Honda to state parks where we could pretend we were the only 2 people in the world. We shared tents without thinking about it, our sleeping bags zipped together for warmth, and I would lie awake listening to him breathe, memorizing the sound the way other people memorize prayers. In the morning, he would wake with his arm thrown across my chest, and we would both pretend it meant nothing, that it was just the accident of sleep and proximity. Those were the years when I thought anything was possible, when I believed that the careful distance we maintained was temporary, something we would eventually outgrow. I imagined conversations we might have, confessions that would change everything, moments when the truth would finally be too large to contain. But college ended, and Owen moved away for graduate school, and the distance between us became more than geographical. Now my days follow a pattern as predictable as the seasons. I wake at 6:30 and make coffee in the French press Owen bought me 3 Christmases ago. I read while I drink it, usually poetry, something that can be finished before the day begins and demands too much of me. I shower and dress and walk the 4 blocks to work, past the same houses with their same drawn curtains, their same sleeping secrets. Evenings are for cooking dinner for one, for washing a single plate and a single fork, for folding laundry that never quite fills the machine. I eat at the small table by the window, where I can watch people pass on the street below. Sometimes I see couples walking hand in hand, and I wonder what that must feel like, to move through the world with someone who chooses to be beside you, day after day, without question. On the mantel above my fireplace sit framed photographs that tell the story of a life lived at the margins. Group shots from college reunions where I stand slightly apart, smiling but not quite included. Pictures from work parties where I hover near the edge of the frame. And scattered among them, like breadcrumbs marking a path I've never been brave enough to follow, are photos of Owen and me, captured in moments when we forgot to maintain our careful distance. This is the life I've built around his absence, structured like a poem with missing lines, each day a stanza that almost makes sense but never quite resolves. And when he calls to say he'll be in town, when he asks in that casual way if he can stay for a night, the careful architecture of my solitude trembles like a house built on sand, beautiful and fragile and always on the verge of collapse. The message arrives on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between work emails and grocery store coupons in my inbox. Owen's name appears on my phone screen like a small miracle, and I feel my chest tighten before I even read his words. He'll be in town for a client meeting, he says, just one night, and he wonders if I have space for him to crash. The tone is casual, almost careless, but I read it 3 times, searching for something beneath the surface that might not be there at all. I type and delete responses for 10 minutes. Of course, I want to say. Always, I want to say. Instead, I send back something appropriately friendly but not desperate, something that matches his casual energy while hiding the way my hands shake as I hit send. The next few days pass in a haze of preparation that I tell myself is normal, reasonable, the kind of thing any good host would do. I changed the sheets on the guest bed twice, settling finally on the navy blue ones that I bought years ago but never used. I fold towels with hospital corners, arrange toiletries in the bathroom like a hotel concierge, vacuum rooms that were already clean. On Thursday, I leave work early to stop at the market. I wander the aisles collecting ingredients for the salmon dish Owen mentioned loving the last time he visited, along with the wine he favors, the brand of coffee he drinks in the morning. I catch myself humming while I cook, something I haven't done in months, and the realization makes me pause mid-stir, wooden spoon suspended over the pan like a question I don't know how to answer. He arrives just after 6, his rental car pulling up outside my building with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows exactly where he's going. I watch from my window as he gathers his overnight bag, straightens his shirt, runs a hand through hair that's grayer now than it was 5 years ago. The sight of him sends something electric through my chest, familiar and devastating as always. When I open the door, his smile is the same one I've been memorizing for 20 years, but there's something different in his eyes, a hesitation that wasn't there before. We embrace briefly, the kind of hug that friends share, but his hand lingers just a moment too long on my back, and I find myself cataloging the sensation like evidence of something I'm not allowed to hope for. He looks good, I tell him, because it's true and because it's safe. He thanks me and says I look good too, and the compliment sits between us for a beat longer than it should, weighted with something neither of us will name. Dinner unfolds with the easy rhythm we've perfected over the years. He tells me about work, about the consulting project that brought him here, about his drive down through towns that never change. I listen and ask questions and pour wine, falling back into the role I've always played in his life, the steady presence who asks for nothing more than his attention. But something is different tonight. He calls me Nate the way he always has, but the name sounds softer somehow, more careful. When he laughs at something I say, his eyes stay on my face longer than necessary. He reaches across the table for the salt, and his fingers brush mine, and neither of us pulls away immediately. We move to the living room after we've finished eating, settling onto my couch with what's left of the second bottle of wine. The space between us feels charged in a way it never has before, like the air before a storm. He sits closer than he usually does, his knee nearly touching mine, and I try to focus on his words instead of the warmth radiating from his body. He talks about Claire, about how they've been drifting apart without either of them acknowledging it. He mentions how his children are growing up too fast, how his daughter barely looks up from her phone when he comes home, how his son asks questions he doesn't know how to answer. His voice carries a weight I've never heard before, a kind of weariness that makes me want to reach out and touch his hand. Sometimes, he says, staring into his wine glass, he wonders what would have happened if he'd made different choices. If he'd been braver when he was younger. If he'd paid attention to the things that mattered instead of the things that seemed safe. The words hang in the air between us like a confession, and I feel my chest tighten with the implications. I want to ask what he means, want to push him to say more, but I'm afraid of breaking whatever spell has made this honesty possible. Instead, I listen as he talks about feeling invisible in his own life, about going through the motions of being a husband and father while some essential part of himself remains locked away. When he looks at me, really looks at me, I see something raw and unguarded in his expression. He tells me that being here feels like coming home in a way his actual home never does. That I'm the only person who has ever really seen him. The words cut through me like a blade, beautiful and terrible in their honesty. We sit in silence for a while, the weight of what he's shared settling between us. The wine has made us both more honest than we usually allow ourselves to be, and I can feel the careful boundaries we've maintained for 20 years beginning to shift, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. When we finally move toward the bedroom, the air between us hums with possibility and danger in equal measure. We brush our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink like an old married couple, and I catch his eyes in the mirror, see him watching me with an expression I can't quite read. In the guest room, we undress on opposite sides of the space, maintaining the polite distance that has always defined us. But as we settle into our separate beds, I can feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like a physical thing. The ceiling fan hums its familiar rhythm above us, and I close my eyes and wonder if tonight will be the night when everything changes, or just another evening spent navigating the space between what we want and what we'll allow ourselves to have. Sleep doesn't come. I lie in the darkness listening to Owen's breathing across the room, trying to decode the rhythm of it, whether he's truly asleep or just pretending the way I am. The ceiling fan continues its steady rotation, a metronome marking time in a night that feels suspended between what was and what might be. The sheets rustle as Owen shifts, and I hold my breath, hyper-aware of every small sound he makes. Outside, the occasional car passes on the street below, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling before disappearing, leaving us in darkness again. The loneliness I've built my life around feels different with him here, not absent, but transformed into something more complex, a longing that has shape and weight and the possibility of resolution. Owen speaks first, his voice cutting through the quiet like a prayer. He says he's been thinking about that camping trip we took the summer after sophomore year, when we drove to the lake and spent 3 days swimming and fishing and talking about the books we were reading. I remember that trip with perfect clarity, how we shared a tent and lay side by side each night, our sleeping bags touching, talking until exhaustion finally pulled us under. I tell him I remember too, and my voice sounds strange in the darkness, rougher than I intended. He laughs softly and says he was so young then, so certain that he knew what he wanted from life. He thought growing up meant having all the answers, he says, but now he realizes it mostly means learning to live with questions that have no solutions. We talk in whispers, trading memories like secrets. He reminds me of the night we stayed up until dawn discussing Thoreau, how we walked to the edge of campus as the sun rose and sat on the stone wall overlooking the valley. I had wanted to tell him something that morning, wanted to say the words that had been building in my chest for months, but the moment passed, and the opportunity never came again. He asks if I ever think about the person I was back then, whether I miss that version of myself. The question catches me off guard because I think about it constantly, about the boy who believed in possibilities, who thought love might be simple if you were just brave enough to name it. I tell him I miss the certainty more than anything, the way I used to believe that wanting something badly enough could make it real. Time moves strangely in the dark. Minutes feel like hours, and hours compress into moments. Owen tells me about the last conversation he had with his father before he died, how they talked about regret and the weight of choices not made. His voice breaks slightly as he admits that he's been thinking about that conversation more lately, about the things his father never said and never would. I want to comfort him, to cross the space between our beds, and offer the kind of presence that doesn't require words. Instead, I listen as he talks about feeling like he's sleepwalking through his own life, going through the motions of being the person everyone expects him to be while his real self remains hidden, even from himself. The confession hangs in the air between us, and I feel something fundamental shifting, like the first crack in ice that's been frozen for years. I tell him that I understand, that I've spent most of my adult life feeling like I'm watching my own existence from a distance, never quite inhabiting it fully. And then it happens. Owen moves without warning, his body crossing the invisible line we've maintained for 20 years. I feel the mattress dip as he settles beside me, not touching but close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his skin. My chest tightens with a mixture of terror and hope so intense I can barely breathe. He doesn't say anything, doesn't offer an explanation or an excuse. He simply lies there, his presence beside me as natural as breathing and as impossible as flight. I remain perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell, might remind him of where he is and what this means. Minutes pass in absolute silence. I can hear his heartbeat, or maybe it's my own, pounding so loudly I'm certain he must hear it too. The warmth of his body seeps through the space between us, and I close my eyes and try to memorize every detail of this moment. The weight of him beside me, the sound of his breathing, the impossible fact of his presence in my bed. When I wake, gray light is filtering through the curtains, and Owen is gone. I find him in the kitchen, already dressed, coffee brewing in the machine I set up the night before. He smiles when he sees me, but there's something different in his expression, a wariness that wasn't there before, as if he's seeing me clearly for the first time. We move around each other carefully as we prepare breakfast, navigating the small space of my kitchen with the polite distance of strangers. But when he hands me my coffee mug, his fingers brush mine and linger there for just a moment, and I feel electricity shoot through my chest like lightning. The day unfolds in a series of charged moments that feel both monumental and ordinary. When he reaches past me to get something from the counter, his hand rests briefly on my lower back, and the touch burns through my shirt like a brand. When we sit on the couch reading the newspaper, he chooses the spot right beside me instead of the chair across the room, his thigh pressed against mine as we share sections and make idle comments about the news. Every glance feels weighted with meaning. Every casual touch carries the memory of last night, the way he moved across that invisible line and changed everything between us. We don't talk about it directly, but it's there in every gesture, every pause in conversation, every moment when our eyes meet and hold for just a beat too long. He tells me about his daughter's piano recital, how she played a piece by Chopin that made him cry in a way he couldn't explain to his wife. I listen and watch the way his hands move as he talks, the same hands that I've watched gesture through 1,000 conversations, but they seem different now, more precious, weighted with possibility. The afternoon slides by too quickly. We take a walk through my neighborhood, and he comments on the old houses, the way the trees arch over the streets like cathedral ceilings. When we stop to look at a garden that's particularly beautiful, he stands close enough that our shoulders touch, and neither of us moves away. We talk about books we've been reading, movies we want to see, the small details that make up a life. But underneath it all runs a current of something deeper, a conversation we're having without words about the choices we've made and the ones we might still make. As evening approaches, I can feel him preparing to leave, the careful way he begins to gather his things, check his phone, mention the drive ahead of him. The reality of his departure settles over us like a weight, and I realize that tomorrow I'll wake up alone again, that this brief interruption in my carefully ordered life will end and leave me with nothing but memory. But something has changed between us, something that can't be undone or forgotten. The transformation has begun, not in grand declarations or dramatic moments, but in the quiet spaces between words, in touches that linger too long, in the way we now look at each other, as if we're seeing something that was always there, but never acknowledged. Tonight, I know, will be different. The careful distance we've maintained for 20 years has been breached, And there's no going back to the safety of pretending we're just friends, just two men who share a history and nothing more. The air between us hums with possibility and danger, and I can feel us both standing on the edge of something that will either destroy us or finally set us free. Dawn comes like a revelation, soft and inevitable. I wake to find Owen beside me, not in the guest bed where he started, but here, drawn across the divide sometime during the night by gravity or longing or something deeper than conscious choice. His hand rests near mine on the pillow, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin, but not quite touching. His face in sleep is younger somehow, unguarded in a way it never is during waking hours. I lie perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too deeply in case it disturbs this impossible moment. The sight of him here, in my bed, in the pale light filtering through the curtains, pierces something deep in my chest. This is what I've imagined 1,000 times, but never allowed myself to hope for. The simple intimacy of waking beside someone who chose to be here. His breathing is deep and even, and I watch the rise and fall of his chest beneath the thin cotton of his t-shirt. There's a vulnerability in sleep that daylight never permits, a softness around his eyes that makes him look like the boy I fell in love with 20 years ago. I want to reach out and touch his face, to trace the line of his jaw with my fingertips, but I don't dare risk breaking whatever spell brought him here. When his eyes finally open, there's a moment of disorientation, a brief confusion as he registers where he is and what it means. I watch recognition dawn across his features, see him remember crossing that invisible line in the darkness. For a heartbeat, I think he might bolt, might offer some excuse about sleepwalking or accident, but instead he simply looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. Neither of us speaks. The silence stretches between us, heavy with acknowledgement and possibility. His hand moves almost imperceptibly closer to mine, not touching but eliminating another fraction of the distance that has always separated us. It's the smallest gesture imaginable, and yet it feels like the most significant thing that has ever happened between us. We get up slowly, moving around each other with careful awareness in the morning light. He doesn't mention how he ended up in my bed, and I don't ask. Some truths are too fragile for direct examination, too precious to risk with words that might diminish their power. The day unfolds differently than others before it. We make breakfast together, and when he passes behind me at the stove, his hand brushes across my lower back in a touch that could be accidental but feels entirely deliberate. When we sit at the table, he chooses the chair beside me instead of across from me, close enough that our knees bump when we shift position. The afternoon stretches ahead of us like a gift. We walk to the park a few blocks away, where families push children on swings and couples sit on benches sharing newspapers and quiet conversation. Owen and I find a spot beneath an oak tree, and as we settle onto the grass, he sits closer than friendship requires, his shoulder touching mine. He talks about his marriage with an honesty that feels like confession. He tells me about the distance that has grown between him and Claire, how they share a house and children and daily routines, but rarely share themselves. He describes lying in bed beside her at night, feeling more alone than he ever has, wondering how two people can occupy the same space and remain such mysteries to each other. His voice carries a weight I've never heard before as he admits that he sometimes envisions a different life, one where he made braver choices when he was younger. He says he wonders what would have happened if he'd paid attention to what his heart was telling him instead of what the world expected. The words hang in the air between us like smoke, visible and intangible at once. I want to tell him that I've wondered the same thing every day for 20 years, that every choice I've made has been measured against the choice I didn't make with him. Instead, I listen as he struggles to find words for feelings he's never allowed himself to examine. The comfort I feel with you, he says finally, looking directly at me with eyes that hold 20 years of unspoken truth, is unlike anything else I've ever known. With you, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't have to perform or explain or justify. I can just be. The confession settles into my chest like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about our friendship. I see recognition in his eyes, the dawning awareness of what he's just admitted, and I watch him wrestle with the implications of his own honesty. I tell him that I know exactly what he means, that being with him has always felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. That every other relationship I've attempted has felt like wearing clothes that don't quite fit, playing a role in someone else's story instead of living my own. We sit in silence for a long time, watching families pack up their picnic lunches and head home to their ordinary lives. The late afternoon sun filters through the leaves above us, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the grass. Everything around us continues as normal, but between us, the world has fundamentally shifted. When we finally stand to leave, Owen's hand brushes mine as we gather our things. This time, neither of us pulls away. His fingers intertwine with mine for just a moment, and the touch sends electricity shooting up my arm. It's the simplest gesture imaginable, holding hands like children do, but it carries the weight of everything we've never allowed ourselves to acknowledge. Walking back to my apartment, we maintain that slight contact, our hands bumping together with each step, neither of us quite ready to let go completely. People pass us on the sidewalk without a second glance, unaware that they're witnessing something monumental disguised as ordinary, a revelation happening in plain sight. Back in my living room, we sit on the couch with careful distance between us, but the air feels charged in a way it never has before. Every glance carries meaning. Every pause in conversation feels pregnant with possibility. When Owen reaches for his water glass, his movement brings him closer to me, and this time he doesn't pull back. His thigh presses against mine, warm and solid and undeniably present. The silence that falls between us is different from all the others, heavy with acknowledgement and fear and longing in equal measure. We both know what we're admitting without words. Both understand that we've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. The revelation isn't dramatic, isn't accompanied by declarations or promises, but it's devastating in its quiet simplicity. I look at Owen, really look at him, and see in his eyes the same truth I've been carrying for 20 years. He sees it too, the recognition passing between us like a secret finally shared. We know, both of us, exactly what we're feeling and exactly why it matters, and exactly why it might destroy everything we've built our lives around. But for now, in this moment, the truth exists in the space between us like something alive, fragile and precious, and finally real. Reality arrives like a slow-moving storm, inevitable and unstoppable. Owen's phone buzzes throughout the evening with messages from home, reminders of the life waiting for him 3 hours north. Claire asking about his meetings, his son needing help with homework, his daughter requesting money for a school trip. Each notification is a tether pulling him back toward responsibilities that have nothing to do with this room, this moment, this impossible truth we've finally allowed ourselves to see. I watch him read each message, watch his face shift subtly as he remembers who he is outside of this space we've created together. Father, husband, provider, the man who coaches Little League on Saturdays and helps with science fair projects and attends parent-teacher conferences with appropriate concern. The weight of those roles settles back onto his shoulders like a coat he's forgotten he was wearing. Tomorrow morning, he'll drive back to that life, and I'll wake up alone in a bed that will still smell faintly of his presence. The thought sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold and absolutely certain. We both know it, have known it all along, but the knowing feels different now that we've crossed the lines we spent 20 years carefully maintaining. The choice becomes inescapable as the evening deepens. There is no universe in which Owen leaves his children, no scenario in which he abandons the family he spent 15 years building. And there is no version of this story where I ask him to, where I become the person who destroys what he's worked so hard to create. The mathematics of love, I realize, don't always add up to happiness. We sit at my small dining table, a bottle of wine open between us, dinner half-eaten and growing cold. The conversation has died away, leaving us in a silence that feels both comfortable and unbearable. Every word we might speak feels too heavy, too loaded with implications neither of us is prepared to handle. Instead, we drink and look at each other across the small space, memorizing details we'll need to carry forward into whatever comes next. The wine makes everything sharper and softer at the same time, the edges of pain more defined, but somehow more bearable. I want to ask him what happens now, want to beg him to stay, want to confess every feeling I've carried for 20 years and lay it all at his feet like an offering. But the weight of consequence holds the words back, keeps them trapped in my throat where they burn like swallowed fire. Instead, I watch the play of candlelight across his face, the way shadows move across his features like secrets. He's beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with conventional handsomeness and everything to do with familiarity, with the accumulated weight of 2 decades spent learning the geography of his expressions. I try to imagine not seeing this face across a table again, not hearing his laugh in my living room, not feeling the particular quality of attention he gives when he listens. Owen sets down his wine glass and looks at me directly, and I see something breaking apart behind his eyes. The careful composure he's maintained all evening cracks slightly, revealing the raw uncertainty beneath. He opens his mouth as if to speak, then closes it again, and I watch him struggle with words that refuse to arrange themselves properly. Finally, he reaches across the table, his hand covering mine with deliberate intention. The touch burns through me like electricity, and I have to force myself not to pull away from the intensity of it. His fingers are warm and slightly rough from weekend yard work, familiar in a way that makes my chest ache with recognition. "You've always been home to me," he says softly, and the words fall between us like stones dropped into deep water. His voice carries 20 years of carefully controlled emotion, and I hear in it everything he's never allowed himself to say. The confession is both a gift and a goodbye, beautiful and terrible in its honesty. I turn my hand palm up beneath his, our fingers intertwining in a gesture that feels both natural and impossible. The moment stretches between us, tender and final, carrying all the weight of what we've discovered and what we cannot have. I want to tell him that he's been home to me too, that every other place I've lived has felt like temporary shelter, but the words feel too small for what I'm feeling. Instead, I squeeze his hand and try to memorize the feeling of his skin against mine, the particular way our fingers fit together, the weight of his palm pressed against my own. This is all we'll have, I realize, this moment of acknowledgement before the world reasserts its claims on both of us. We sit like that for a long time, holding hands across the table while the candles burn lower and the wine grows warm in our glasses. Neither of us speaks, but the silence is full of everything we're not saying, every confession and declaration and plea that would only make this harder than it already is. When we finally let go, the absence of his touch is immediate and devastating. My hand feels cold and empty, and I have to resist the urge to reach for him again. He pulls back slowly, reluctantly, and I see in his eyes the same loss I'm feeling, the same recognition that we're already beginning to let go of something we only just allowed ourselves to hold. The rest of the evening passes in a haze of ordinary activities made extraordinary by their finality. We wash dishes together, moving around each other in my small kitchen with careful awareness, every brush of contact precious and painful. We watch the news on my couch, sitting close enough to share warmth, but not quite touching, the space between us charged with everything we've admitted and everything we can't change. When it's time for bed, we move through our familiar routine with new weight, brushing teeth side by side, exchanging quiet goodnights, retreating to our separate spaces. But as I lie in the darkness listening to him settle into the guest bed, I know that something fundamental has shifted between us, something that can't be undone no matter how carefully we try to return to what we were before. The choice has been made, not through words or dramatic gestures, but through the simple acknowledgement of what's possible and what isn't. Love, I understand now, doesn't always get to triumph over circumstance. Sometimes it has to be enough to know that it exists, to carry the truth of it forward into lives that don't have room for its full expression. Tomorrow, Owen will drive away, and I'll begin the long process of learning to live with what we've discovered. But tonight, In the darkness between us, the truth sits like a secret finally shared, painful and precious and absolutely real. We love each other. I've always loved each other. And sometimes love has to be its own reward, complete in itself even when it can't change anything at all. Morning arrives gray and muted, the kind of overcast sky that makes everything feel suspended between seasons. Owen packs his overnight bag with the same careful efficiency he's always possessed, folding clothes into neat squares, checking his phone one final time before sliding it into his pocket. I watch from the doorway, memorizing the sight of him moving through my space, knowing I'll replay these moments long after he's gone. We don't talk much over coffee. The weight of last night sits between us like something tangible, beautiful and painful in equal measure. He thanks me for dinner, for letting him stay, using the same polite words he's used a dozen times before. But his voice carries a different quality now, rougher around the edges, as if the simple phrases have become difficult to speak. When it's time for him to leave, we stand awkwardly by the door, neither of us quite sure how to navigate this goodbye. Finally, he steps forward and pulls me into an embrace that lasts longer than friendship requires, his arms tight around my shoulders, his face pressed briefly against my neck. I close my eyes and breathe him in, trying to store the memory of his warmth against my body. He pulls back and looks at me with eyes that hold everything we've discovered and everything we can't change. For a moment, I think he might say something more, might offer some word or promise that could bridge the gap between what we want and what we can have. Instead, he touches my face gently, his thumb brushing across my cheek in a gesture so tender it takes my breath away. Then he's gone, the sound of his car starting in the street below, filtering up through the windows. I watch from my living room as he drives away, his rental car disappearing around the corner into a world I'll never be part of. The silence that follows is deafening, complete in a way that makes the apartment feel cavernous and strange. I stand in the center of my living room for a long time, surrounded by the evidence of his visit. The guest bed remains unmade, sheets twisted from sleep and confession, still carrying the faint scent of his presence. On the coffee table, the wine glass he used last night sits where he left it, a half circle of burgundy staining the bottom like a kiss he forgot to take with him. I don't cry. The pain is too deep for tears, too fundamental to be released through something as simple as weeping. Instead, I move slowly through the apartment, touching the objects that bore witness to our brief crossing. The blanket we shared on the couch, still warm from our bodies. The chair where he sat at breakfast, reading the news on his phone while I watched him over my coffee cup. The doorway where our eyes met and held for just a moment too long. In the kitchen, I washed the dishes from our final meal together, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. His coffee mug feels heavier than it should, weighted with memory. I dry it carefully and place it back in the cabinet, wondering when I'll be able to use it again without thinking of him drinking from it. The guest bedroom draws me back like gravity. I sit on the edge of the bed where Owen slept, where he moved closer to me in the darkness, where 20 years of careful distance finally collapsed. The sheets are cool now, but I can still feel the impression his body left in the mattress, the particular way he occupied space. I lie down where his warmth once was, my head on the pillow that still carries traces of his scent. The ceiling fan hums its familiar rhythm above me, the same sound that accompanied every whispered conversation, every moment of recognition, every touch that changed everything between us. I close my eyes and try to hold onto the memory of his leg draped over mine, the simple intimacy that started this transformation. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time moves differently in the aftermath of revelation, each moment stretching like taffy while entire afternoons compress into heartbeats. Eventually, I get up and move to my desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. The letter writes itself, words flowing onto the page like water, finding its natural course. I tell him everything I couldn't say while he was here, every feeling I've carried for 20 years, every dream I've built around the possibility of us. I write about the boy I fell in love with in college, about the nights I lay awake imagining a different life, about how his presence has always felt like coming home to myself. I write about the choice we didn't make, the words we couldn't say, the love that exists in the space between what we want and what we can have. I tell him that he was right, that he has always been home to me, that every other place has felt like temporary shelter. I write until my hand aches and the page is full, until I've said everything that needs saying to no one who will ever read it. When I'm finished, I fold the letter carefully and walk to my bookshelf, scanning the hundreds of titles that line the walls like silent witnesses. I choose a volume of poetry, something about longing and loss and the beautiful impossibility of human connection. The letter slides between the pages like a secret finding its proper hiding place, another story tucked away among all the others. The weight of it settles into my chest, both unbearable and life-giving. It's an acknowledgement that love existed between us, even if it couldn't be claimed, even if it has to remain hidden like pressed flowers between the pages of a book. Sometimes I realize love is its own reward, complete in itself even when it can't change anything at all. Outside, the gray afternoon deepens toward evening. The street lamps flicker on one by one, illuminating lives I'll never know, stories I'll never be part of. I make dinner for one, eat at the table where Owen's hand covered mine, wash a single plate, and fork and wine glass. This is my life now, the same as it was before, but fundamentally altered by what we discovered together. I carry the truth of us forward into days that look identical to all the ones before, but everything is different now. The loneliness has a name, the longing has a face, and somewhere in the space between what was and what might have been, love continues to exist, quiet and constant as breathing, real as the memory of his touch.